Hello and welcome to our last BAFTA Guru Games programme. I'm very sad to see these come to an end, but we are going out with a bang because today we are talking games programming, which I'm very excited about because it's something a little bit different. We're going to be diving into the craft of it, and we've got three great panelists for you, so this is going to be a good one. Before we get started, if you need captions or transcribing, we have both available today. So if you look down at the bottom, there should be a little pop-up now telling you how to access those. So they're available for the whole session. We're also going to have a Q&A. So make sure you submit questions. Again, that's at the bottom of the screen. There's a little Q&A tab there. You can submit your questions and we'll try and answer as many as possible at the end of the session. Now, for anybody who is listening rather than watching, I'm Elo Woods. I'm a mixed race woman. I've got hair that I definitely didn't cut myself during lockdown, long dark hair, don't worry about it. And I'm sitting on a blue sofa with a brick background. So I'm just going to get our guests to introduce themselves, tell us what they do, and if you can also just give a little tiny visual description of yourself. So Joanna, I'll start off with you.
Hello, my name is Johanna Person. I actually do cut my own hair, so you got that going. I'm a senior game tech programmer at the Gorilla. I've been there for over 7 years now, I think. Time really flies, and I focus on the cinematics programmer. So anything related to cinematics, conversations, linear animations, all of that type of programming is what I do.
Fantastic. Andrew, how about you?
Hi, I'm Andrew Roper. I'm Technical Director of Spilt Milk Studios. About 5 years now, I think. I had to remember that. I've been in the industry about 9 years or so now. So at Spilt Milk, I primarily deal with a lot of kind of like the gameplay and the tools side of things. So ensuring that all of our builds work and get submitted to release portals and get sent to our testers and things like that, while also making sure that the actual game runs and is actually playable. So I kind of do a little bit of everything right now. In terms of where I am, I'm wearing a light grey hoodie with some green curtains behind me and wearing glasses.
Fantastic, thank you. And Liam, how about you?
Hi, so I'm Liam DeValmacy. I'm a senior principal programmer at Media Molecule. I've been there for maybe a bit more than 6 years now, working on Dreams. Yeah, and I sort of do a bunch of things, but mostly sort of game code, gameplay side of programming. And in terms of visual description, my hair has not been cut since like January, so it's long and flopping over to one side at this point. And I'm wearing a patterned, very, very brightly patterned shirt. Yeah.
That was a good one. I like that description. Well, I mean, we've literally had questions pop in during your introduction. So, you know, when you've done a solid introduction, that there's already people who've got more questions for you. But what I want to do is, I think particularly because games programming is an area where, you know, no two jobs are the same, even if they share the same title. So let's talk through what kind of a standard day or week at work looks like for you, so everybody understands what each of you do. So Andrew, I'll start off with you for that one.
Cool. So it's easier for me to answer this in terms of week rather than day. So start of the week is primarily I'll have a chat with the other director of Spilt Milk, who's also called Andrew. This does not get confusing whatsoever. So we will just look at the week ahead. We'll figure out, like, do we have any key dates coming up in the week? What's our task list looking like? And this is generally where we sit down and go, like, right, what am I focusing on this week? Like, are there any like big class A bugs or something that needs to be dealt with urgently, or are we in a situation where like, oh, okay, we're working on a new feature, things like that. So primarily the Monday is always our planning day. And conversely, the closer it gets to the end of the week, we actually implemented something called Fun Bug Fridays, where it's all those little bugs like, oh, the text is slightly out of alignment, or there's this tiny little thing that you want to do, but it's so low priority. We just let our programmers have a day of, right, just go at it. You can do that. So kind of like very serious planning at the start, all the core nitty gritty of bugs and features during the week, and then just ending on a high of just like fix some fun stuff.
I love how you did make that sound like a treat. You're like, as you know, as a treat on Fridays, we let them do kind of low priority bugs. That's a little treat for them. I I like that a lot. Liam, for you, what does, again, a day or a week look like for you?
Yeah, so, I mean, it's actually very similar. Our Mondays is very much a lot of meetings. It's sort of catching up on where we're at, talking about, our longer term goals and our short term goals and what needs addressing immediately. Discussing any fires that have sprung up. You just naturally little issues pop up that mean you need to stop the show and focus on them. And then just working through sort of whatever comes out of that really, and it tends to be whatever features we're currently focusing on implementing and making good. But sometimes when in the lead up to deadlines, it's often just bugs. So it varies from week to week, but Mondays is the let's sit on Zoom for most of the day sort of day, and then the rest of the week, ideally, not always, is ideally just heads down. Let's do some code.
I feel like that's, all of us, isn't it? Not specific to programming. Monday is just the Zoom day. You just have to really allocate that one to Zoom. So, Joanna, for you, does that, do those two kind of processes reflect yours, or is yours a little bit different?
It's a bit different. Monday is not usually a Zoom day for me. For me, it's very different depending on where in the project we are. So if we're early in the project, maybe working a whole week on a technical design or a larger feature, just figuring out what we're supposed to be doing for a week or so. And then I'm heads down just coding for a month, 2 months straight. And there's not much other that comes in and like other priorities are out the window because now we're working on this specific thing and that's all I'll be doing. But then in the end of projects, it's way more random. Then it's every single day is super different. It's like, okay, let's see, what's the catastrophe today? Okay, what do we need to deal with? What are we doing today? What's on fire? What do we have to fix? So it's very different. I don't really have a week schedule at all. It's very much fluid.
I feel like something that's been mentioned a lot is firefighting, and this definitely comes up when I talk to programmers all the time. It feels that there's lots of kind of jumping on things at the last minute, but I am interested in an ideal world where things aren't little catastrophes every so often. What's your process for whether it's a specific feature, whether it's game design as a whole, as a programmer, what is your process from idea generation to actual creation and implementation? Joanna, I'll come straight back to you for that one.
Yeah, so usually, we have the content creators. For me, it's usually the cinematics team that wants a feature or they want a thing. They want to be able to do a thing. And then it's my job to figure out the way of doing this, the best way, hopefully the best way of doing it. And if it's a larger feature, we start with a technical design, which is just writing down on paper, this is how we imagine it to work. And then going into the UML diagrams, the class diagrams, how should the code actually function? This will go through multiple review processes with my leads lead. So everybody's on board, because it's really important that, with the teams that I work with, we're a lot of people, and a lot of people often get influenced by my decisions and what I decide to make. So it's really important that we're all on board in the beginning. We know this is what's going to happen. And then in the end, I'll probably set out, if it's really large feature, a month or 2 months of my time will just be working on this specific thing. So yeah, that's kind of the process of going from the idea. Smaller things can be way more casual, like, okay, this sounds cool, let's just make it. It takes a couple of days. It's not that much of an investment. But when it comes to larger features, it's really important with the communication, getting it down on paper, getting it cleared. And yeah, that's a lot of the time I do that.
Andrew, for you, you're in a much smaller team, and as you said, you kind of do a bit of everything. So for you, does your process look quite different to that?
I'd say it's a lot more dynamic, because at Spilt Milk we are at any one time anywhere between maybe 4 and 10 people, as opposed to Joanna's team size. Like, Joanna's department probably eclipses our entire studio. So we're typically a lot more dynamic. So I would work a lot with a designer at the start, because it's typically they'll be like, I want to be able to do this and that, and we will typically break it down and focus on one thing each week. So say for example, we're making a new game, we'll spend 1 week just on movement and nothing else, and just focus on every movement. And as the week goes on, the designer will discover like, oh, I actually want to be able to tweak this, I want to be able to tweak that. And it's like, okay, I'll sort that all for you. And then after about 4 or 5 weeks, we've just got this rock solid foundation. So that's typically how it's very dynamic, it's very adaptive with us. And because we're a small tiny team, we have the flexibility to be able to do that. Admittedly, there is less documentation, but it is mostly in like Discord chats between us that we can write up documentation afterwards if needs be.
And so, Liam, you're, I guess, kind of somewhere in the middle, aren't you? You're not quite as big as Joanna's team, not quite as small as Andrew's team. So what does your process look like?
Yeah, no, it's exactly as I was hearing it, the middle ground between those two approaches, really. We are small enough, as Andrew says, that we've got some of that sort of dynamism of being able to very quickly sort of implement new features on the spur of the moment. When either our team needs them, or whether our community are crying out for something, because Dreams is an ongoing game that has a player base. Yeah, I mean, the process, as Joanna describes, is very similar, right? It involves sort of sitting down with the relevant team or the relevant people in the studio, and sort of discussing what they're after. And there is that thing of, again, it's trying to sort of narrow down a need rather than a solution. Like very often you get to this thing where someone says, I want this button in the UI, and you're like, well, what's the actual thing you want to be able to do? And they'll tell you, and be like, well, there's a better way we could do this. So there's a sort of process of back and forth with designers, with artists, whatever, to sort of try and figure out how you get those things in the game. And then from then on, there's a process, of course, of iteration, right? It's very rare that you put a thing in and it's perfect from the get-go. Sometimes that happens, and those are good days. But more often there's sort of back and forth, and it's a sort of process of constructive feedback, and both giving and taking that constructive feedback, which is communication, as Joanna says, is sort of the key there.
Yeah, leads kind of perfectly into my next question, because we had last week or a couple of weeks ago, we had a panel where we explored art and kind of that side of building games. And one of the questions I asked them is, how do they balance their vision with the more technical side? So I guess I'm going to ask you the reverse of that, which is, how do you, as the team that most kind of has to implement the game, how do you work with the other teams? What are the key elements? How do you, what kind of questions do you ask that mean you're balancing their needs and what they want, and say, if it is art, their artistic vision with what you can actually build in game? Liam, I'll come straight back to you for that one.
Yeah, I think again, I think we're just going to keep saying it throughout the thing, because it's one of those things people don't consider with programming often, but communication is just like almost everything, really. But it's really just about making sure that as I say, what the need is rather than what the end solution is, and trying to tailor something around that fits within, your knowledge of the code base and what technically you can achieve. Because often you're aware in the back of your mind as a programmer that there's a very frequent way of thinking in systems. So someone will say, hey, I need this thing, and you'll realize that can come out of extending something you've already got, or building on something that's already there, rather than starting from scratch. And there is that flip side. Sometimes there will be a request that just technically isn't very feasible. Sometimes it requires a lot of R&D, so it's not feasible from like a time point of view of you could do it if you had a few months. And it is quite tricky, I think, from the outside of programming to know where that line is. Like the differentiation between a task that will take you 10 minutes versus one that will take you 3 weeks. Often those tasks can sound very similar unless you are thinking in a code point of view. So it is tricky, but as I say, it's sort of just about feeding back your thoughts on what they're proposing, and sort of having that iterative cycle until you're both happy, and then that's when you sort of start work.
Joanna, for you, when perhaps teams, I was going to say butt heads, but it doesn't need to be so aggressive, when there's just, competing needs or wants, how do you start to build that compromise between programming and whichever side needs something that perhaps you can't quite offer?
Yeah, it happens quite a lot. Especially I work with a lot of different teams. They're using the same tools, but they want different things out of the tools, right? So you always need to try to find a compromise of, this is what we can do, this is what you actually want. And something that I ask a lot, and what we come back to is, what do you actually want to do? Like Liam says, what are you trying to achieve? Like, I understand someone asks, I want exactly this thing. Well, is that actually what you want? Or my lead always say, that's not what you want, which is like a thing that he always does. And it's important. What I've tried to do is make little prototypes if I have time, so that people can try it out. So if someone is not completely on board, because that happens quite a lot, I'm like, I think this is the solution you want, but the other party is not convinced that that is the way to go. So making small prototypes, or like if you just try this out, just try it for a while, because like, please trust me, this is actually what you want. You just don't know it yet. But actually letting the people, well, you work for, try it out and see, like, here, I tried implementing it. This is actually doing what you want, but just try it. And I think that that's a very good leeway of getting people to understand that, oh, maybe this other solution can work. Maybe this can work better than what I wanted. But it's a lot of massaging that in.
Andrew, how much massaging is there for you? Because it feels like, obviously, in a smaller team, it's perhaps a little more intensely collaborative. You know, it's less one team has a vision, this team has a vision, and then they come together. You know, when you're a small team, it feels like perhaps, and I'm making a big assumption here, perhaps, you know, you do butt heads a little bit less.
There is definitely butting of heads, and instead of like different teams, basically each person is their own team. So you can still approach this from like a team perspective, and I think everything that Liam and Joanna have said like echoes true. Even in a small company, you need to make sure that you are delivering what they want, and having that conversation early on with them, just to basically say, okay, yes, like this is an easy task. I can do this in like an afternoon or a day. Or if they want something which they think sounds really simple, and you actually say, no, like this won't work because this, and you have to do all this. And like as soon as you, the programmer, have to start explaining to them, you can just see the other teams going like, oh no, this was a mistake. So just being clear, and like it is the communication is key. Just making sure that so say there is a big task that they want, have a conversation with them to say like, can we do this another way? Is there a different route which we can take, which makes my life easier, but can have like a similar end result? So it is communication. It's just kind of like, it is that, I can't remember the word, but it's just like the back and forth of just coming to a mutual agreement on what they want.
So let's talk about how you got into games, because I'm very interested to know if where you are now is where you always wanted to be, or whether, as is often the case in games, you've kind of meandered and ended up finding a place that fits for you. Andrew, I'll start with you.
I actually don't think I originally wanted to be a programmer. I think I originally was going to be. I know when I was a lot younger, I was like, oh, I'm going to be a 3D artist. And I was really fascinated by like creating 3D models, and my entry into games kind of started with I'd finished A levels. I was kind of at a bit of a loss what to do. I was originally like, oh, I don't want to go to university, blah blah blah. And my mum, of all people, just basically had the, Andrew, what are you doing with your life? And it's like, Andrew, what do you like doing? Programming, because at this time I was doing a lot of web programming for my dad. And she was also like, what else do you like? Video games. And she literally went like, just, okay, mash them together, find a course. Like this is evidently what you want to do, but you haven't realized it. Next thing I know, I've gone off to Derby University. Did a degree in games programming, and admittedly my route from there kind of, I did stumble into the games industry a little bit. I entered through the freelancer route, and then eventually other Andrew asked me on board Split Milk permanently. So that's kind of my stumbly route into games.
That's not too stumbly. It feels, you know, like you were continually stumbling forwards, you know. Yeah. So, Liam, how about you? What was your journey to the job that you have now?
Yeah, there's something actually that Andrew said there that I resonates with me as well, which is the sort of thing of like, you get to the point where you're coming up to the end of A levels, people are like, what do you want to do? And there was this sort of slow realization where the thing I most enjoyed doing at A levels was computing, so we got to do programming classes. and then I knew I loved games, and I knew that games programming was a job. And then like I say, someone at some point was just like, those things can make a job. You can go and do that. And I was like, oh, okay, yeah. It was sort of it was almost like I knew the whole time. I just wasn't aware it was sitting there in the back of my brain. So yeah, so I think initially actually when I was looking for universities, I went to EGX. They had like a careers fair where you could go get like CV advice or university advice from someone in the industry. And yeah, I got advised at the time that computer science was sort of an all-encompassing sort of programming background thing that would be useful in any case. So that's what I did. I went to Southampton. I did that for 4 years. And then I just basically got incredibly lucky. I was coming up to the end of my degree, looking at places to apply to, applying in a lot of places. I didn't realize, I sort of remembered the other day, actually, I refound my job spreadsheet, and it's color coded and there's reds on the ones that are rejected, and it's just like it's a lot more red than I recalled. I just blocked it out, I guess. But I went to Media Molecule's website, and they had one job opening, which was experienced gameplay programmer, which I very much was not. But they had like a line at the bottom which was like, but if you don't see a role here for you, send us an email anyway. And there was a moment where I was like, they're not really looking for, so there's like a parallel universe where I didn't click the okay, email them button. And I went and did something else entirely. But thankfully, I clicked, and I got lucky enough to get into Media Molecule, which has been great. And recently, there was like a nice parallel where I did some of those careers fairs at EGX from the other side, and there was like a really weird sort of, oh my god, I'm on the other side of the curtain type thing, which was lovely.
That is lovely. That's a really lovely story. Also, I love, if we didn't already know that you were a programmer, that you had your job application spreadsheet that was carefully color coded. Yeah, very much living up to the stereotype there in a lovely way. Joanna, how about you? Tell us about your career journey.
Yeah, I knew pretty early on that I wanted to work in games, but not really what part. Well, I wanted to be an artist first, but I did my A-levels in math, technology, and programming, and I hated programming. I thought it was terrible, and I never wanted to work with it. Both my parents are programmers, so I didn't want to be like them for obvious reasons. So after my A-levels, I had a short vocational degree in 3D art and animation, where I didn't like that either. And I started sliding back more into programming, automizing things, and I started working as a technical animator, because at the time it was kind of the in-between between animation and programming. I could automate things, and I kind of liked it. That was what I liked. So I started working like that. I then got a job at Guerrilla, which was super cool. But still the technical animation part wasn't really programming enough for me. So I started sliding more and more into the other programming parts. I was really lucky to get the chance to join one of the actual C++ programming teams at Guerrilla. But of course, I don't have an education in programming. So at that time, I had to practically learn it all myself whilst working full time. So that was not trivial, but definitely worth it, because now it's many years on, and this is what I do for a living, and I think it's super cool. But yeah, a bit less orthodox path into what I'm doing today, I think. But it's very possible. You don't need to know what you're doing. Well, in the beginning, at least.
I love that. That's a lovely tip for anybody watching. You don't really need to know. Don't worry about it.
I get that a lot. A lot of people are like, yeah, but how did you know? And it's like, well, I didn't know at the start. Now I know what I want to do. But you don't need to know when you're 18 years old. It's super difficult.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. You definitely don't need to know. Like I said this in, I think, a programming panel that we had, but I was like, I'm 32 and I have just started a computer science degree. So you definitely don't need to know at 18. You're fine. Don't worry. This kind of leads me nicely into my next question, which was to ask what you consider your technical skill set. So, what languages do you use? What do you consider kind of the day-to-day skill set in your role? Because obviously this is another area that really kind of varies even within the discipline of programming. So Joanna, I'll start with you.
Yeah, for me, it's not very exciting. It's just C++. and that's it. Yeah, you need to know C++. And yeah, know your data structures, you need to know your design patterns, and you need to know C++. And that's pretty much the skill set. Yeah, it's quite uninteresting, but that's really it. I like C++, so for me it's quite fun, but you know.
Do you have any tips for people kind of learning C++?
It's not very easy. It took me a while. It takes a while to make it fun. I like to say that because it was not very fun in the beginning. I see Liam and Andrew are nodding, but yeah, it's not very fun when you're learning it. It's still not always fun. But no, I think my best tip is find people more senior than you that can mentor you and help you out and ask questions, because that's how I've learned almost everything, is by just asking my seniors bunch of questions and sitting down and, okay, I don't understand this. Can you just take 20 minutes and explain it all to me? And that's really where I've learned the most. And I'm still learning a lot like that. And that's the best advice I can give.
And I'll just tack one more question onto that, which is, I think one of the things people ask a lot and they're often overwhelmed by is there are so many places to start if you want to be a games programmer, or more broadly, you know, if you want to call yourself a games designer. So for you, would you recommend C++ as kind of a starting point for somebody who's interested in game design?
It depends on what you want to do. It really, really depends, because starting out in C++ it's steep. It's like practically a brick wall. So there's other languages you can start with as well. Python is good. I think Python is a good starting object-oriented programming language where you can start. But it depends on what you want to do. If you want to go AAA games, game studios like Guerrilla that does their own engine, you need to know C++. There's really no way around that. But there's many, many other studios that uses other languages, Unity using C#. So it's a lot about figuring out what you actually want to do and where your role is, where you actually fit in. I knew that I wanted to work in AAA, so that was obvious to me, but it takes a lot of just figuring out where you want to be.
So Liam, for you, what's your skill set, whether that is languages, whether it's software? What do you think is, you know, for you, the broad base somebody would need to do the same job you do?
For my specific job, yeah, similarly, because we're sort of big enough that we roll our own engine, it's all C++. So that there's the sort of, that's the key sort of technical one. There's external things like we use Perforce for version control and knowing how version control works and all those sorts of things. There's the sort of tangential things that are sort of not specific to a language. So as Johanna says, things like data structures and design patterns and maths. That's a big one, knowing your 2D and 3D maths to an extent. You don't need to know the specifics of what each component of a quaternion means, but you need to know how to use them as a thing. So that's a big one. And as we were talking about earlier, I actually think like one of the biggest, one of the things that I've developed most, because when I got into the industry, I sort of had focused on just getting to grips with the programming side of things. But I think that the thing that's boosted me most as a programmer are the things outside of that I've focused on. So things like organization and communication are big ones, but also interest in design, I think is something that really elevates sort of your ability to program, just because programming is sort of more of a means to an end, right? It's a path to express design. So if you yourself have a good sense of design, have a good sense of things like, how your player might experience something, or what might make it more comfortable to use or more intuitive, everything you're implementing will just sort of more naturally fit, will require less iteration. So I think that's sort of been the biggest sort of additional skill boost outside of just the normal technical stuff. In terms of languages, there's a thing where when you're programming, once you sort of know the flow of programming and you've picked up one language, picking up more is a lot easier. So on your question of like what you'd recommend to start with, personally, I think it's less important about the language and more about what you try and make. So for a lot of people that are looking to get into games programming, the thing they want to make is a game, right? And so my recommendation at this point is always Unity and C#, because you get a lot out of the box for that. C# doesn't have quite the steep wall of learning that C++ has. But I think once you get to know how to use C#, how to use, to make a basic game in Unity, learning C++ becomes a lot easier because you're familiar with the basic concepts already.
Yeah, no, I love that. I started out, so my first kind of taste of games programming was I went on a course that Unity offered, a really fantastic 6-week course. And obviously we did C#, and then I came out and I was like, oh, I'm a genius. I'm going to tackle C++. And I was like, oh, okay, all right. But I definitely know what you're saying, that it does help. I like what you're saying about the kind of the structure and the flow of programming. You definitely do feel that move across, even though it's a lot harder. It's a lot harder. So Andrew, how about you? What would you call your kind of core toolkit and skill set?
Well, I feel like I have things to add based on what Joanna and Liam have said, but they've
Go for it.
nailed. Well, that's the problem. They've kind of nailed it so much. Yes, C++ does have basically the White Cliff of Dover wall of learning if you haven't gone into it before. I remember the first time I opened C++, and I think the number of memory leaks that I caused by not deleting temporary things as well. That was I think I crashed a couple of university computers. But yeah, that and exactly what the other two have said as well. Like the data structures, the data patterns. It's like once you know how something works in one language, like it is easy to transfer into another language, even if it's a language that you've never heard or touched before. And even scripting languages, which is kind of like a higher level within programming, will follow similar structures and similar patterns and things like that. So ultimately, yes, it really does depend on what you want to do. If you are looking to get into AAA, like there aren't many AAA studios that won't be using C++. A lot of the smaller studios use C#. We are one of the studios which use both because because I like hurting my brain. But no, so we have a project going on in Unity and Unreal currently at the same time, like a couple of small projects. But the thing with Unreal is and Unity now as well, like there's visual scripting as well. So in terms of actual flow of like understanding how code works and like how it flows before diving into actually like writing the code, that could be a good point to start, because then you can actually see that, right, this connects to this is multiplying this number and setting this variable, and then I'm doing something with this variable. You can actually see a visual representation of it, and then you maybe use that as a template to say like, right, I'm going to try and write that into code, into actual like C# or C++ code as well. I would recommend something around like C# and Unity for starting out with. But again, once you've got your foundations, it's easier to transfer into other languages, and there's plethora of tutorials and things out there if there's something you're stuck on. Like I still Google daily on problems in C# and C++.
Well, this kind of leads nicely again onto my next question, which is I'm interested in what for you is something you've worked on that you've been really proud of, something that for you was very successful, because I think people often think of programming as it either works or it doesn't, rather than, the kind of actually quite creative discipline that it is, where it's not just about, yes, no, was it, did you code it beautifully? Someone else going to come in and go, wow, when they see how you did it. So tell me something, Andrew, I'll start with you, that you've worked on. Yes, sorry, I'm coming straight back to you. Do you know what? You said you had nothing to add, so I'm coming to you first this time, and I'm expecting a spectacular story. Please go ahead.
Oh no, I'm now trying to think rapidly over all the things I programmed now to think of what I'm most proud of.
I will also accept if it's not something you've done, but something you've seen that you were really impressed by in a way that perhaps only a programmer could be impressed by.
Oh no, that's I've just got so many things running through my head and I can't.
Did that not help at all?
No, it really hasn't helped.
Does anybody else want to jump in? Anyone else have something that kind of comes to mind?
Sure, I can jump in.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'll save Andrew for a while.
I feel like this is like a saving moment while I try and rack my brain to remember my post.
Turn off your camera and just run away.
Yeah, exactly. Like
No one can stop you. Yeah. So what I work on the most is well, a tool that started being worked on in Killzone 2, which was way before I was already working Gorilla, but I've been inheriting a large part of it, and that's what we call the sequences, or yeah, the sequence tool, which is practically how we make cutscenes, any type of linear animations, conversations, and opening doors, like rappelling down a tall neck in Horizon. All of these sequential animations are done in this tool. You can add particles, you can add sound, and this is something that I've been really lucky to be a part of and helping build on. And it's something that I really enjoy working on, and I think it's fantastic. You can see many other people from other teams working on this tool as well. And I just love making it better and see what the content creators can make with it, because that's really why I'm there. I'm just there to add little bits and pieces to see the real creative people make amazing stuff, right? So I can then play the game later and say, oh, that's really cool. They did an amazing job there. Like I'm so happy I could be a small part of enabling them to make that. So that's something that I feel really proud of.
Oh no, that was a good answer. Andrew, I don't want to pressure you, but did you come up with anything as good as that one? Because that was a good start.
I don't know.
Would you like a bit more time?
I did just manage to misclick the mute button.
I can jump in if
I'll
you
head
need a
over
bit
to
more.
Liam. Yeah, Liam, you go
Yeah.
ahead. Give an even better answer so we really
Oh,
pile on
no.
extra.
It's kind of tricky because I want to say very similar things to what Joanna's saying, because so Dreams, the thing I've been working on for 6 years, is a creative tool set, but rather than sort of being internal and just used by our designers and our artists, it's a thing that our players can use. So there's a thing where we've got to make these tools that not only are powerful enough for our team to make some cool content with, but also for the wider world. And so our designers and our artists and our audio people and all that are often very busy using the tools. So a lot of the initial tool R&D and the design and that sort of thing, it's an iterative process working with them, but a lot of the design of it came down to us as programmers. So the great thing is being able to look at all those tools and knowing, oh, I designed that, or I implemented that tool, or and as Joanna says, the rewarding thing is just seeing the stuff people make with it. And the moment I crave more than anything out of those tools is when someone shows me something and I have no idea how they've done it, and I'm like, I made these tools, how have you managed to, like, we've got like a game that doesn't support like transparency, but like somehow some people have got like transparent objects. We're like, how have you somehow broken our engine? So like it's great. I love seeing when people just completely surprise me with the features I've implemented, and that's yeah, I think that's definitely the most rewarding part.
Dreams is astonishing, I have to say, when you see the things that people can do with it as a tool. The creativity it enables is absolutely breathtaking. I know when I worked at PlayStation Access and I made a small version of our team in there, and I was so proud of it. And then I went and looked through what other people were doing, and I was like, oh, okay. It is breathtaking, absolutely incredible. All right, Andrew. So we've had, an entire world of creativity. That's what Liam's enabled. That's what he's most proud of, is enabling creators of the future. So what's the thing you're most proud of?
Actually, having a brief think about it, it's weird because a lot of the times with being a programmer in the industry, much to the perception of kind of like non-industry, kind of like retail and trade, is a lot of the time it feels like you've done your job well when no one complains about it or something like that. Because it feels like as soon as something breaks, it's like, oh, programmers this or programmers that. It's like, but if it's all fine, it's like but thinking about there's kind of like a couple of systems, because back in my freelance days I worked on Volume by Mike Bithell, and I was basically tasked with kind of rebuild. I'm still going to go. The community talk has kind of inspired me to talk about that a bit. I kind of rebuilt how the community map sharing system worked. So that was kind of like a lot of server work and back and forth. But the thing I guess was most proud of was all of the in-game dialogue, I think it was modeled as similar on how Grand Theft Auto does it as well. So, so say you're in a car or you're doing action in the game and you get interrupted by something, the dialogue system knows like where you were. It knows like the correct beat on the audio track that's being played, and then once action kind of like calms down, the system goes, right, where were we? Okay, let's restart playing that. So it feels like a smaller thing in the grand scheme of things, but because it allowed the conversation and the dialogue to keep flowing, it was one of those things that the players didn't necessarily know what was going on, but there was a lot of work behind to make sure it worked as intended, like not like skipping words ahead or things like that. It's not, because there's been lots of things that I've worked on, but I think that was the one that once I know one of the things that once I got working was a proper like yes moment.
All right, well, that was definitely worth the wait. I'm so glad you managed to think of, because that's a lovely, I think that is a really great example of the kind of work the program does. I think you're so right that it's one of those things that when you can come up with this great little innovation, and it's just to ease friction, to make the game feel smoother and more immersive in a way that you can't pinpoint. You know, if somebody said, what was it? You'd be like, I don't know. It just felt more, you know, I felt like I was there. But it's one of those little hidden things that's actually somebody behind who had a brainwave and was like, this will make, you know, a player really sink into the game. So that was well done. You came up with such a good example. That was really good. All right, I'm going to jump to Q&A, because we're just about in the last 15 minutes-ish, and we've had quite a few questions come in. So I like this one from Joe McFadden. So I think, Joanna, I'll start off with you for this one. Has your idea of what is good practice changed at all as you've got more experienced as a games programmer?
Oh, definitely. All the time. Like that's the thing, that it's so dynamic, because you learn new things. Like I learn new things almost every day. And the more you learn, the more your world changes, right? And how you see, like maybe you have more experiences, you finish a project and you realize that one thing works, one thing doesn't work. Or I always love to come back to commenting code. Please comment your code, comment the intent of your code. PSA, a little PSA here so I can squeeze it in, comment the intent of your code. But there's so many things that you just learn with time. And like from where I was whenever I started in the industry 8-9 years ago, like everything has changed. Like my entire like opinion on how you should program or how you should work in game has completely changed. So yeah, it's very dynamic.
Liam, I'll pass that question to you as well.
Yeah, I have to echo that it has changed a lot. It changes on, you know, the sort of obvious stuff of learning more design, you know, design patterns and data structures and all these things, and learning how to worry about cache usage and all those sorts of things. But I think in terms of like best practice and how you sort of develop that opinion, for me actually the biggest one was that sometimes the best practice is not sticking to best practice. Like learning that one was a huge sort of win, I think, because often there's a balance as a programmer you have to strike, which is you know, taking the slightly less perfect path in the name of expediency, or in the name of there's a temptation as a programmer, I think, for the best practices. Okay, let's make systems that are extendable and maintainable and all these things, but often you end up either doing a lot of work that you don't need because it never gets extended, or you know, you spend a long time on it and it turns out the design has changed and it's no longer good enough. So there's like this balance between implementing features in a really great way versus sort of sometimes making the trade-off of technical debt, which is just the idea of, you know, code that needs work or is a hack, or, and you know, sometimes that's inevitable if you've got like a show coming up and, you know, in the, you know, right corner of one level this bad thing happens. Sometimes it's easier just to say in the code, if you're in the right corner of this level, don't do the bad thing, than it is to fix an entire system, right? And you know, sometimes those hacks last for years and they hold up engines, and that's fine. But my point is more that, yeah, sometimes for me at least, the development of my learning has been that best practice is something you should try to stick to, but it's not a failure if you trade it in sometimes for other things.
Andrew, feel free to add to that if you want to, but I'm going to throw in another question because this one feels quite relevant, which is Leander Schneeberger, such a good name, wanted to know, how quickly do you become aware when tools, processes, or workflows are working against your design goals, and how at all if at all, are you able to address that, e.g. custom tools versus just ignoring and working around it? So I thought that kind of blends in quite nicely with what we were just discussing.
For me, should I continue on?
For Andrew, that one's for,
Oh,
yeah.
So it feels like you get to find out quite early on, because like once you've kind of like got the I'm going to call it the skeleton of the tool, and you've got like the basic processes of doing everything, like the earlier you can get it into the designers or the artists or the other people's hands, providing that they actually use the tool like as frequently as they say they will at the start, you should find out pretty quickly, because there's only so many ways that you can test your own tool, or like this kind of goes in every aspect of programming. There's only so many times you can test your own code and expect outcomes. As soon as you give it to someone else, they'd be like, oh, it's broken. It's like, wow, I wasn't expecting that. So it is normally pretty, like the big things are normally pretty evident very early on, but there can be some sneaky things which say like don't happen unless a data file you're writing to is above a certain size, which won't happen at the start, but as time goes on and things are built up, will creep in later on. So yeah, pretty early, I'd say a lot of the things with tools are found.
I would like to add to this, because it's something that I've run into many times, and it's also the trade-off of when you realize something is structurally flawed, there might not be enough time till the end of the project, etc., to actually fix it. So there's and this also runs into the first question of seniority and what you're learning. And this is something that I felt a lot, that those decisions of, do we fix it or do we fix it by working around it for the next couple of months? That's where a lot of what you've learned throughout the years comes in. It's like, okay, what's the best decision to do right now? Because sometimes you need to make very quick decisions of, okay, it's not good, but it's a better choice to working around it now and fixing it later.
I'd like to add on that there's a in terms of hearing back on when a process isn't working, especially from artists and designers and audio people that are very talented, there's this sort of double-edged sword of them being very talented, because on the one hand, they'll know what they want, and if a process isn't working for them, they'll tell you. But on the other hand, if they're very talented, as I was saying earlier, they'll sort of use what they've already got to work around things, and they'll just silently not tell you they're doing that. So there's this thing of like, when something's really bothering them, they'll let you know constructively, obviously. But sometimes, 6 months down the line after implementing a feature, it turns out they're using it in this completely warped way that you just hadn't heard about, because it's missing a slight bit of a feature, and they've just realized, because they're great at using whatever tools they're given, that they can do wonderful things with it anyway. So sometimes you have to go out a bit out of your way to sort of solicit that feedback on your processes, on your tools, on those sorts of things.
Fantastic. Now I'm going to try and bundle a couple of questions that we've had together, because we're like, as you answer, we're just getting more and more questions coming in. So I'm going to essentially bundle quite a few questions together that we've had, which kind of cover bad programming habits. What are your bad programming habits? What are challenges in programming? And also we've had questions around what are things that people learn as kind of newbie programmers or come into the industry that are incorrect, and they, you wish they hadn't learned that, things they need to unlearn when they join the industry. So hopefully that makes sense. Kind of challenges, bad habits, things people pick up that they shouldn't. So Liam, I'm going to come to you for that one to start off.
Oh yeah, tricky. I might be doing an Andrew thing of needing time to think here. I think the interesting thing is it's hard to know, especially because it changes depending on where you go, what your day-to-day and what sort of programming things you'll need. For me, I think one of the bad habits I was in the habit of doing when I joined, at least, was I sort of tried to make everything, as I was saying earlier, very extensible and maintainable. I tried to make very structured object hierarchies, class hierarchies rather, and then the rest of the code base wasn't really like that. And there's sort of this slow process of me learning that actually a lot of the time the better thing is just that everything sort of follows the same sort of style and pattern. Even like it's more important that it's all consistent, rather than that you've got sort of 20 different areas of the code base written by different people, all in completely conflicting styles. So learning to get around that. I think the other one was more of a process one of I came straight out of university, and at university they teach you, these structured development models of like there's the waterfall model and there's agile, and I sort of joined the industry expecting that I'll join and they'll give me a rundown of these exact processes, and it's some of that is used for sure, but I think often in just the heat of game development and trying to get things done and trying to make cool stuff, it can be a bit more chaotic than that, and sort of learning to roll with that chaos is a bit of a tricky learning thing that you sort of have to unlearn the sort of anxiety of just sort of going with the flow, and it's and I found that really helped me when I sort of got over that barrier, and I was more happy with just sort of chasing different directions and sort of sticking with that way of doing things.
Joanna, I'll ask you next. What are your bad habits?
That was pretty molded into working at Guerrilla because that's where I did my transition into C++ programming. So I think I got a lot of help fixing a lot of my bad habits early on because I didn't have time to develop because, well, I didn't go to uni, but we have a pretty strict style guide at Guerrilla because our code base is absolutely huge and we need to have people just keep to the style guide. That's how you write your code, how you write your loops, just so things look the same and they're readable to everybody. So I can go into graphics code and still kind of understand something. And what I also see a lot from people coming straight out of uni is that they've been taught, so sometimes they've been taught like a strict way of doing things, and that's not how we do things here. And then kind of getting out of, but forget some of that. That's not how we do it. This is how we do things. And letting that go and learning the ways of where you're working, because it's going to be different in every company. You're going to see others, different types of style guides. This is how we do a specific thing. This is how we do another thing. So you need to be really flexible to, where you work and the people you work with, and just learning the new habits. And otherwise, when it comes to my own bad habits, it's just overcomplicating things too early. And that's also something that comes back to the first question of seniorities. That's something that I've learned more and more is like, when do you do the easy fix and when do you do the complicated structure? Because that's a trade-off that you need to think about a lot. And early on, it was like, of course, you will want to go for the complicated fix that works in all situations, just like Liam brought up as well. But sometimes it's just much better to do the easier, more suitable fix for the context that you're working in.
Andrew, I'll ask you the same thing. What are your challenges? What are your bad habits?
So I'll agree. A lot of my bad habits early on was overcomplication. It was kind of like, overcomplication and over engineering, being like, I need that. I'm writing this class or this functionality. Am I going to need it in like 6 months' time? Yes. Okay. Let's write it in a way now that is going to be maintainable in the future. I very much got in a rut of trying to make everything very maintainable and very structured from the start, when ultimately at the start of a project, especially in a team of our size, you throw half of it away after a few months and rewrite it. And just learning to accept that, like, my code's going to get thrown. I'm throwing away my own code. I'm rewriting my own code. Just because the second time you write it, you don't know how. You just write it in a way that's a lot better. It's like, oh, okay. So kind of like that habit was a thing to get out of. And like Joanna was saying, with the different style, like code styles and style guides and things like that. So over the past couple of years, we've been doing, well, mostly this year, I've done some contract work for a few different companies. They each have their own different code style, and just being able to learn to adapt to that, because in the past I was like, okay, I need to be able to forget things and adapt. That helped me be able to suddenly switch to, right, this is their code style, this is how they do things. But yeah, I've got hit hard by the overcomplication at the start, and also not really, like, when I came out of university and when I was freelancing for a bit and working on my own things, because I was primarily a solo programmer. I didn't have anybody to directly ask questions to, so because of that, I got very much into an insular I'm not asking questions. And absolutely, you should be asking as many you should be asking questions. So that's another bad habit I've managed to get. I had, and I've managed to get myself out of now, thankfully.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned overcomplication, because I'm about to ask a really complicated question, because this is the last one I can ask. So we've had lots and lots of questions again on a similar theme. So this is a multi-part question, and I will repeat it if needed. Essentially, 3 areas we've had questions are, I know we touched on it earlier, but what's your kind of general advice for breaking into the industry? Then more specifically, if you had to start in one place, where would you suggest somebody starts if they want to get into programming? And we've also had quite a few questions on how do you progress? So how do you make the jump, to senior, to higher levels than that? How do you keep skilling up? How do you keep learning? So essentially tips for, beginning, if you're very, very at the start of your journey, how to start thinking about becoming a programmer, tips to actually take that first step, and then tips to take the next step in your career. Hopefully that wasn't too overcomplicated. Andrew, I'm going to come to you.
So in regards to breaking in, I know this isn't the best answer considering the COVID times that we're in, but just getting to know, my initial ins into the industry were meeting people at events and just seeing them as like eye to eye as like peers in the industry. Even though I was a student at the time, like just before I left, there was still like Game City Festival, there was EGX, there was I think Res has just started at the end of my university times as well. So kind of like getting to know people is half the battle, especially if you're wanting to get into like the smaller end of the industry. Evidently, it will be different for breaking into AA or AAA. But I found that having somebody who you could ask, like, oh, do you know of any work going anywhere, or could you give me some advice on this, kind of can open a few doors. In terms of programming wise, my gut wants to say kind of like the gameplay and QA area, because you can do a lot of QA programming. Like QA isn't just I'm playing the game for 8 hours a day and writing down bugs that I find. Like you can be a test engineer. You can write the unit test, which helps validate the games and things like that. And kind of like a junior gameplay position is kind of wide enough that you can be given different areas to work on in the game without being expected to know, like, program the tools pipeline or program the art conversion pipeline to convert the art from Switch to PlayStation. It's like they're not going to expect you to do that. But in terms of progressing, I'm not the best person to answer this, because I literally went from freelancer to director. So I feel like that's the most unrealistic career progression. But I think that's better for Liam and Joanna to answer.
Yeah, Liam, I'll pass it over to you. And feel free, we're kind of running out of time, so feel free to shrink it down to like a sentence.
In terms of getting in, make games, I think is a big one. A degree is obviously helpful for giving you a reason to study in the discipline of it, but if you can show that you've made some great stuff that shows a great like design eye and is interesting, that 100% sets you apart from most of the pack of people trying to get in. In terms of once you're in, what I think helps you progress from a programming sense is taking on different areas, trying to express an interest in different places, and make sure you get an opportunity for different technical challenges, and working with your production team if you're at a large studio to enable that. But in terms of a personal progression, I think the biggest one is, I guess it's analogous, is taking on responsibility. It's helping out the people in your team. It's giving your opinion in terms of things of direction, and in terms of design, and in terms of process. And I think that's sort of what elevates you above just programming, is being part of the driving force behind making the game, right? It sets you apart from just doing a technical thing to being part of the lifeblood of what slowly starts to form.
Oh, I love that. That's such good advice, being part of that driving force. Joanna, you can finish us off for the evening. What's your answer to somebody who either wants to get in or progress in this industry?
Getting in, I still think internships, if you're managed to get that through your education or similar, it's a really good way also to get into AAA. If you want to get into AAA and manage to get an internship, it's a very, very good way of start getting in. And then of course, just doing stuff on your own time is excellent. And when it comes to growing when you're already inside, again, I think mentorships, and even if it's just the people you work with, asking questions, and I still do this, tell me what I can do better. Because the people you work with every day are going to have the best eye of seeing where you can improve the most. And that's where you have the real improvement, especially when it comes to your technical skills. And then I very much agree with Liam when it comes to taking on responsibility. And yeah, if you're just passionate about something, go for it. And it's going to show, because you're just going to take ownership and you're going to want to work on it. And you're going to take that to the next level. So it's very important that you also work with something that you're actually passionate about.
Well, what a place to finish. Thank you so much to our wonderful panelists this evening. Joanna, Liam, Andrew, you've been absolutely fantastic. I feel like I learned so much this evening, so I absolutely thank you for joining us. Everybody who tuned in, thank you for watching. Sorry if we didn't make it to your questions. They were probably in one of the bundles I made, so they definitely did get answered, but I hope that you enjoyed it. That's the end of our BAFTA Guru Games panels for this year, but they will all be up on the YouTube channel, the BAFTA Guru YouTube channel, so you can go back and watch them. We had a wonderful panel masterclass on the building of Hades. We also had the craft of arts panel, and of course today's panel on games programming. So do go back and check those out. But for now, that's it from us. Another big, huge thank you to our wonderful panelists. A thank you to you all for watching, and it's goodbye from me for this evening. See you all soon.